and welcome to our program Where God Weeps, a program where we talk about the realities of the Catholic Church around the world. For several years, Christians in various regions of Nigeria, but especially in the northeastern part, have lived in terror under the threat of fundamentalist terrorist groups like Boko Haram or simple bandits. Thousands of people have lost their lives in these attacks, and many more have been traumatized by these episodes. Women, children, and men live with the psychological wounds of this violence. Throughout this crisis, the Church has responded in many ways, attending to the needs of refugees, helping the crippled, giving spiritual comfort, even collaborating to cover the most basic needs of lodging and food. But without a doubt, one of the most important tasks is the psychological care for the victims of so much violence. To know more about the work that the Church is doing in this regard, today we will have a conversation via Skype with Father Joseph Fidelis, Director of the Human Resource and Skill Acquisition Center in Maiduguri, Nigeria. Father, welcome to our program.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on the show and the program.
It's really nice that you're giving us this opportunity to be in contact with you directly from your diocese in Maiduguri. So, as I said in our introduction, we're going to talk about the work, specifically the work that you're doing with victims of this terrible violence that is happening in Nigeria. But to have a context, Father, first, can you describe us and tell us a little bit of the location of where is your diocese? Where is Maiduguri in the large map of Nigeria?
Maiduguri, as a diocese, falls within the northeastern part of Nigeria. And as a diocese, it covers the whole of Borno State, Yobe State, and the northern part of Adamawa. So geographically, it's a quite wide area, and it's bordering regions or countries like Cameroon, Chad, and Niger. And so Maiduguri then at the northeastern part is the seat of the bishop, but geographically as a diocese is quite wide in the northern part of Nigeria.
And this area in Nigeria, Father, has had special situation or particular problems with the Muslim community. Now, I have to be careful how I word this because it's not necessarily the Muslim community, but it's these radical groups, as I mentioned in our introduction. But can you explain us why is this particular area of Nigeria facing this challenge?
The northeastern part of Nigeria has faced this challenge because of the presence of radical Islamic preachers. And I love and thank you for putting it in the right context. That not all Muslims, but radicalized fundamentalists who have learned so difficult and extremist interpretation of the Quran and the Sharia law and intend to impose it on people. And so the existence of such group in our community, they took advantage of the illiteracy, the poverty, and the challenges of teeming youth who for a while have been disenfranchised and feel pain of lack and poverty. And they started to teach and indoctrinate and work on the psyche of these young people, promising them what is not attainable, that they can conquer and exterminate Christians, take over the region, and establish an Islamic caliphate. And so with this, these radical groups now got some followership, and young people began to follow them until unfortunately they took up arms even against the government, but particularly also against the Christians that they intend to send out of the region.
Now, Father, you're touching one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, and it is, why is this really aimed at Christians? Is Boko Haram intended to eradicate Christianity from this particular region and, as you say, establish the caliphate? Is that the goal?
Primarily, that is the goal of the extremist fundamentalists, to establish an Islamic caliphate. But always, as you will know, in the context of political Islam and with those radical ideologies, there will be economic motives, there will be political motives. That's why I put the word political Islam, because it's both conquest for religion to establish power. But in order to establish power, there is also need for resource control. So these factors all play a role in this. And sometimes in the understanding of the crisis or the war then in Northeast Nigeria, either people take the part of economic emancipation, where they think that it is just trying to establish an economic hub, or they take the part of the climate change and say, oh, well, it was caused by the climate change, or they take the part of politics and say, oh, but it's just a quest to establish a territory. But all these factors play a role in political Islam, especially in the ideology of the fundamentalist and extremist preachers.
So it is really important what you're saying, Father, because there are many factors, there are many elements that interact to create this mess or these circumstances that facilitate the actions of this terrorist radical group.
Yes, these factors play a big role. And you see, in order to get power, they will use religion, because predominantly the northern part, Islam has arrived here quite earlier than Christianity. And by the way, because of the growing number of Christians, they think that Christianity is a threat.
Yes.
And so they seek to attack it. And we know that Christianity and Islam are both proselyting religions. And so because Islam has been quite here early, they appeal to religious sentiments of the people, promise power and wealth. And so it's very easy for them to get into that habit. But let us also remember there were antecedents of trying to further this Islamic caliphate. So yes, back to your question, yes, it is to establish an Islamic caliphate and exterminate the number of Christians here. But they allude to all these factors in support of what they want to attain.
Father, now let's translate this description that you've done. Now let's translate this into the reality with the people, because we're going to talk about the victims of all this. So we can start with that terrible episode that you lived in 2014 at the school. Just to have an idea for our audience of what are they living? You know, yes, it's easy to talk about the attacks of Boko Haram, but concretely, what is happening to your people, Father?
Concretely, with the emergence of this violence, the terrorists took up arms and began to kill people. Violent attacks on people using machete, using knives to cut people in a very brutal way, subscribing to use of improvised explosive devices to attack churches where people go for worship. And of course, where protection was provided by, let's say, police or military, they also attack military and police formations. So you will find in this whole plethora or complex situation, attack on Christians, attack on the police, attack on the military, and sometimes even where the Muslims are, what they call moderate Muslims, or those who want to sympathize with Christians, are even attacked themselves. But predominantly, anyone that stands in their way, they attack and kill. And how do they do this? At the beginning, it evolved in different stages. First, they began going house to house at night and were slaughtering people. Then they started attacking shops and business areas of Christians. Then they began also, the next stage was putting bombs in churches where people were worshiping on Sunday. After now they were chased from the cities and went into the Sambisa forest, they began attacking the roads where they would stop a vehicle, ask Muslims to stand one side, Christian one side. They either kill them there or they take them away into the forest. These are the kind of people probably that some of them were even attending to us who will be discussing. So these were the various forms of attack. And what do you see? Brutal killing, maiming, and bombing people.
You, as I mentioned earlier, you live this in your own flesh. In that attack in the school in 2014, can you describe us that episode?
Yes, thank you. It was a fateful Friday, and that day they had planned, I think, to come and free some of their men who were kept, because oftentimes the military caught them or they brought them into the barracks where they kept them in prison. So that day, the intention was primarily to free some of their fighters from a military base called Giwa Barracks. But unfortunately, the route or the path they will use to go out of the city into the forest is along this road, the old Damboa Road, as it is called. And the church happens to be sited along that road, along that path.
Mm-hmm.
So this Friday then, when we were at this assembly with kids, there were gunshots and bomb blasts. After they had broken the cell and they were out on their way, the military, who were by then providing security in front of the church, now had to engage them. And there we were trapped between this situation where we had school on one side with kids crying and shouting and screaming, and the Boko Haram engaging the military and shooting indiscriminately. And thank God for the military man who came and advised. He said, Father, don't let these children, because they will pick these children and use them as human shield. Put them back. That was when that unfortunate incident happened that I had to escape that stray bullet. It was when I went to converse with the military man that I just had a very strange sound. I said, Father, take cover. Because I wasn't kidding, I was just a civilian approaching him to find what we could do. And there was a lot of commotion and crying, and they were shooting. So we had to redirect the children back into the school and then use the other side of the fence to ask the children to scale over and begin to run with a few adults that were around. It was just the grace of God. We would have had a large massacre of kids, and probably I wouldn't be here speaking to you today.
Now, this really helps us to realize how essential is this work that you're doing at the Center for people with post-traumatic syndrome after experiences like this. And we're just talking one of many episodes in the region. So now tell us about these victims, Father. What in the PTS or the post-traumatic syndrome, how does it manifest in these children, in men and women that have suffered this violence?
Yes, many of these children were born into that violence. Many of them were born while their parents were running. Some who were quite young, maybe young children and kids, witnessed sometimes the brutal killing of their parents. Some of them also witnessed the bomb blast. Some of them now also live in isolation, some separated from families, living apart from their parents or with a single parent. Some of them living in internally displaced people's camps or persons' camps. So different form of them have experienced either directly as primary victims who have witnessed violence, and that has impacted on their psyche,
right,
which is what we call trauma. Simply means wound. And this has been encoded because such brutal, shocking experiences, wound the psyche, especially those very tiny, fragile psyche of children, but also people probably who don't have enough psychological resources to bear the wound. Now, with all these forms of violence as primary victims or as secondary victims, because they didn't witness the violence, but the retelling of this story over and over, they have introjected or absorbed the violence around the immediate environment. Right. And so this has gone to influence their action. Depending on the level or the gravity of what the person has experienced. Here at the center, we treat from mild stress to very severe pathologies that come from people who have suffered these forms of violence. When I say mild symptoms, you have stress or distress, people who have to cope in a very negative way, or people who have to face the pain of isolation and mild depression. These are simple things. But when you have very pathological cases, maybe victims who have been kidnapped, who have been taken away on the road, who have been taken away forcefully from their parents and taken into this bush. Some have lived with them 6 months, some 1 year, some 3 years. They have lived in the hands of this Boko Haram. Instances are like women who have even, were were forcefully forced to take in children for the combatants or the fighters. And so you can imagine the horror of a woman taken away from her village, taken to the bush, forced to be a slave and a domestic worker, and sexually assaulted against her wish. And she becomes pregnant and she gives birth, knowing that that child will constantly remind her of the pain and torture of being a prisoner out in the bush. Such people come out. And when they come out, their stories are so shocking and touching, very painful.
Yeah.
And you ask the question, how do they manifest? Some begin to have hallucinations, where sometimes they fear that someone is just chasing them. Some have some delusional beliefs. These are very severe ones now. Delusional beliefs and feeling of being attacked. Some suffer from what is known as constriction. Their emotions are completely frozen. They cannot interact with people because you can imagine, I don't want to paint it, I know it's a public forum here. Imagine when someone is sexually assaulted, all the emotions she goes through. And so there's a block, there's an arrest of the emotional expression. And so those constrictive parts and shocks are there. Some have flashbacks of what happened to them. So these are the various forms of manifestation, either hallucination, delusional beliefs, flashbacks, constrictions, and people manifest them in various forms. These are the people we take into this place and accompany them on a journey to see how they can get over this.
Father, you are a psychologist yourself. You're trained as a clinical psychologist, correct?
Yes, please.
And you are a priest. You are a shepherd of souls. So you have this great combination of skills and abilities and the grace of God behind you. So as a psychologist and as a priest, how do you develop your work?
Well, I am grateful to the diocese and to those who sponsored my formation. I had my formation out in Rome, in Italy, Rome, and I came back home and had this center. So on one hand, my formation as a priest has helped me to listen to people, to accompany the wounded, as you say, the shepherd. So as a shepherd, you have wounded flock. Even apart from people who suffer violence, there are people who go through different kind of, not necessarily the Boko Haram violence, domestic violence, children who are neglected by their parents, and all forms of. Our pastoral care for the vulnerable calls us to listen to these persons, pray with them, and help them to make a sense and meaning and build hope. So this is the pastoral care that the priest, even every priest by his formation, should be able to accompany the vulnerable. But thanks to this scientific knowledge also, in the study in clinical psychology, where you have an insight to be able to understand the wounds of people, the impact of this wound, and how it affects their relationship with others, and sometimes even with God. Mm-hmm. Because people ask questions, sometimes they ask us very difficult questions. Where was God when it happened to me?
Of course.
God abandoned me. These are big questions people ask. And so our study now from the clinical side, from the scientific side, helps us to understand also that such wounds, such trauma can affect the belief system of a person. It can affect interpersonal relationship. It can affect the motivation of a person. It can affect the sense of agency, because sometimes you even find self-guilt and recrimination where the person even blames himself for what he or she has not done. Yeah. And so we put sides then, pastoral care for soul, to accompany the vulnerable, but also the scientific knowledge to be able to understand the impact and accompany them depending on that therapy, counseling, or psychosocial support. We provide all these depending on the needs of the person.
Father, more or less, how many people are you helping? How many patients or how many victims have been benefited from this center?
Depending on the forms of assistance we give. For instance, we run it like a kind of little project. And so if you're talking of sensitization, the people we try to sensitize and provide psycho-education on the impact of this crisis, you should be talking of over 7,000 to 10,000 persons. But you see, not all are directly impacted in the same way. So this is on the bigger scale, where we do sensitization in camps, in household, in host community. But direct beneficiaries who have benefited from this service and have graduated, I would say on the mild to moderate cases, we have treated over 1,003, but severe cases would have been over 700 in the past 3 to 4 years.
It's amazing work, Father. And on top of that, because of the title of the center, you also provide some training for people to acquire some skills to eventually have a livelihood.
Yes, thank you very much. When I mentioned 7 to 10,000, one would have been wondering, how can I alone be able to do this? It's impossible. Those 700 persons or 300 persons who directly benefited. So part of what we do, first of all, there is a training of trainers. So we train people. I have people who work with me, another psychologists, but also what we call mental health and psychosocial support counselors. And over the period, we have trained about 24. Okay? Fantastic. So these are the people, yes. So who will then be able to handle other cases? Very severe ones will come to us, and where need be, we even refer to the neuropsychiatric hospital where it is very grave, where they need pharmacotherapy. But in trying to support these persons, we have what we call, in our own framework, we have a continuum of care. Prevention by sensitization and psychoeducation, response to those who have been gravely affected, and empowerment. So it's a continuum of care. Once we are able to support people who have come out through this very difficult journey and they have been able to overcome the very grave symptoms and have picked up life, we also provide them with life skills, some kind of activities they can do to begin to earn something, because there is dignity in labor. There is dignity in being an agent, so the sense of agency. And so the center also provides some kind of life skills, what they can do with their hands, and probably earn little money to support them and their families. And what are these skills? Sewing and knitting, making beads, some kind of little local cosmetics where they can make liquid soap, little Vaseline or cream for themselves, and little detergent they can use for cleaning. And then we also teach them certain things about leather works, where they can make some little local shoes that they can sell for maybe half a euro or €2, depending on the cost. So they learn these skills depending on the choice of the person. We have a variety of them, from sewing, knitting, beadwork, leather works, making little cosmetics, frying local food like beans, cake, and processing food in local way. Whichever one the person chooses, we have some master trainers who also provide these skills. When they graduate, depending on the availability of funds, they can go on and start something. Sometimes, unfortunately, when funds are not there, you are just quiet and you say, at least you have the skill, you can do something for us.
Father, unfortunately, we're running out of time with this conversation, but I don't want to finish without asking you, what can we do? And I mean the church in general, all the audience that have the opportunity to listen to you and these very moving, very touching stories. What can we do for the church in Maiduguri?
I want to first of all thank the donors and the generous persons, benefactors and benefactresses of very various church organizations. We know that people out there have their challenges and difficulties, but they were able to sacrifice to enable us to have this center. But we also need funds to continuously run this center, because our people are still vulnerable. And we need the support of people who, through reputable organizations and foundations like Aid to the Church in Need, like Missio Aachen and other organizations, like Caritas, people who can donate to these organizations, because they now can communicate with our own diocese authorities, and they provide funds for us to equip these people. Because, like I said at the end of the last question, we train them with skills, but you need startup kits. You want to give them some little seed funding, we call it,
right,
that they can buy small and start. So whatever support people can do, it is very good. Not to forget to mention also that while we need funds, we count on a lot of solidarity and prayer. because faith
Yeah.
and communion of our brothers and sisters out there is a great support to us, and we feel encouraged. So on one hand, we need funding. On the other, we need that solidarity and communion of faith.
Of course. Father Joseph, thank you so much. And I think that in the name of the church, I really thank you for this incredible service that you're doing for our brothers and sisters that are suffering so much under this threat. Thank you very much, Father.
Thank you, and have a wonderful program. And I want to thank you for this opportunity, and thank all those who are listening, trusting and believing that if they cannot support, even by funding, they can pray for us, and we count on that. It is important for us. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you, Father. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us in another program of Where God Weeps. If you want to know more about the work that the church is doing in Nigeria, particularly in this area of Maiduguri, we encourage you to contact information at the end of this program. Thank you, and God bless.